So in the last talk, we were discussing the work of M.I.T Csikszentmihalyi and these creative dualities that he had observed in his research. This is that book that he authored on creativity, and the subtitle of it is The Psychology of Discovery and Invention. So he's really interested in the psychological state of people who are truly creative. And we're standing here by the clinical psychology home at UT. In an earlier talk, we looked at the sort of research psychology home in the C Psychology building on the other end of campus. But here is where more people are trained to do clinical psychology. That is to really talk on a personal level with people about their psychological state. And in the book, M.I.T Csikszentmihalyi talks about the brain working as a kind of team, that there's really kind of multiple sides of your brain and that they're working together as a team. And the very best creative work comes when that kind of team is in place. And there's another book that I'm very fond of called Incognito by David Eagleman. And then there's a third book called Subliminal. And these three books kind of work together in a way. M.I.T Csikszentmihalyi is talking about this team of different parts of your brain. David Eagleman is really talking about the fact that you have a conscious part of your brain and you have an unconscious part of your brain. There's a part of your brain that you're controlling and you're directing consciously. And there's a part of your brain that actually is rolling along there, having a big impact on your thinking, but without you consciously directing it. And this book, Subliminal, very much talking about the same thing, that how does your brain work in a kind of subliminal way in conjunction with the part of your brain that works in a much more overt and clear and controlled kind of way. So what are these guys talking about in terms of conscious brain and unconscious brain and how they work together? So your unconscious brain is when you're not thinking about something, but your brain is directing your body or your behavior in a certain way. So let's say, for example, you're throwing a baseball. If you actually think about how am I going to throw this baseball? I'm going to pull my arm back, I'm going to lift it up, I'm going to move my wrist, I'm going to thrust it forward, and I'm going to throw the ball. If you actually think of every process there of how to do it, you can't throw the ball. What you have to do is simply let your brain take over and it just throws the ball. And you'll be much better at it if you're not thinking about it explicitly or consciously. It's the very same thing in many different sports, for sure. That's true when you're driving a car. If you're actually thinking explicitly, what am I going to do with this steering wheel and how do I make the car turn? The truth is you'll wreck the car. What you do is you just let your unconscious brain take over. So there are many, many aspects of our life when we're just letting our brain go on autopilot and control our behavior. Now, that means that we have to train our unconscious brain. It doesn't just learn to do this on its own. We have to actually go through exercises. And let's say when you're learning to serve in tennis, or maybe, I remember one time my tennis coach told me that I had to completely redo my serve. I was doing it all wrong. The old tennis coach had been fine with that, but the new tennis coach was like, no, you have to completely change how you do your serve. Well, you're serving something in tennis and it's just kind of automatic. You toss that ball up and you just do it. But then suddenly I had to very carefully think through where I had my feet, where my elbow was, how I was gripping the racket. Everything had to be conscious. And of course, when I started doing it, it was stupid and awful, and it didn't work, and I was not serving well. But then repeating and repeating and repeating and repeating, you're training your unconscious brain. And then after a while, your unconscious brain can take over, and you're doing it very naturally. So it's a process of a combination of your conscious brain and your unconscious brain, but your unconscious brain is very much shaped by your conscious brain in that kind of training exercise. Now let me give you a couple of examples of how this unconscious brain works. So in this book, Incognito, he talks about this very cool group of people who are chicken sexers. So they take little bitty baby chicks, little furry yellow baby chicks, and they figure out whether they're male or female. This is really important because if you've got that male chick, they're going to go one kind of place and they're going to become fried chicken. But the female chicks, you want to send them to a completely different place, and they're going to be laying hens and they're going to make eggs. So you need to determine very early in that chicken's life where you're going to send them and what you're going to do with them. But when they're tiny little furry yellow things, they actually don't have genitals. And it's very hard to know how you tell the sex of that chicken. And the way they train people to be chicken sexers is they get an expert chicken sexer who can turn the butt of that chicken up toward his face and say, male, female, female, male. But when you're learning that, you actually can't describe what it is you're looking for. So the way they train them is, you know, a novice will be there and he'll look there and he'll say, male. And if it's male, that's good. Or he'll turn it up and he'll say male. And it's actually a female, and the expert chicken sexer whacks him across the side of the head and says, that's incorrect. Now, he doesn't explain why it's incorrect, because you can't explain. It's not something you can see, but after a while, if he gets whacked across the head when he makes a mistake enough times, after a while, his unconscious brain learns somehow to see something that his conscious brain can't see. And they train these chicken sexers, and they actually can be extremely successful and make virtually perfect judgments about that. Now that's when your unconscious brain can do something that your conscious brain actually can't do. So another example of your unconscious brain working. This is a really cool example, again, in this book, Incognito. Sex workers, women who do strips or do lap dances, their income varies significantly according to their menstrual cycle. So their tips are significantly higher when their fertility is the greatest, and their tips are significantly lower when their fertility is the least. So when they're in their menstrual cycle and their fertility is the least, they average about $32 an hour in tips. When their fertility cycle is the very highest, they average $68 per hour in tips. And when it's somewhere in between, they average about $52 an hour in tips. Now, those guys who are giving them the tips, they don't know where they are in their menstrual cycle, but there are all kinds of very subtle messages that get conveyed to the unconscious brain that make those guys more or less attracted to that woman that's giving them a lap dance. And it has to do with body odor. It has to do with waist to hip ratio, which changes during the menstrual cycle. It has to do with confidence. But the unconscious brain of their client is reading all these messages, and it's affecting the satisfaction of their client, and it's reflected in their tips. The unconscious brain is a very, very powerful part of our total brain. So how do the unconscious brain and the conscious brain work together? For one thing, they're very, very different, and in some ways they're competing with each other. The unconscious brain is very fast and very automatic. It's very heuristic. It's very holistic. It's very reactive. It's impulsive. So it's got one kind of way of approaching something. But the conscious brain is somewhat different from that. It's much more slow. It's much more cognitive. It's more analytical. It's more rule-based. It's more reflective. So it's got a different way of approaching a situation. And Csikszentmihalyi is very keen on this kind of team between the two, but a team of rivals, that there's actually some conflict between the way these two approaches are working. And he talks about the benefit of that. So let me read you a little quote from Csikszentmihalyi. He says, "The brain has evolved multiple redundant ways of solving problems. Biology rarely rests with one solution. Instead, it tends to ceaselessly reinvent solutions. Biology never checks off a problem and calls it quits. It reinvents solutions continually. The end product of that approach is a highly overlapping system of solutions, the necessary condition for a team of rivals architecture." So the idea is actually to let your conscious brain do what it does best, let your unconscious brain do what it does best, and to acknowledge some conflict that happens between those. But then how do you resolve that conflict? Because in the end, you may need to come up with a solution to the problem, not multiple contradictory solutions to the problem. And that again is something our brain's actually very good at, resolving those kinds of conflicts. Our brain is good at making a narrative out of a lot of random facts. And maybe the coolest example of that, and this is actually in Incognito, where he talks about what happens when you dream. And a lot of times what happens is your brain is taking all these random events, and it may just light on this and light on that and light on this and light on this, and then it tries to make a narrative out of it. And that's why sometimes your dreams are so freaking crazy, because you're taking one little, maybe something that happened to you yesterday, and it's being combined with something that happened in English class when you were in high school, and it's combining with some other memory that's there of I don't know, a party you went to 6 months ago, and different people, and it's conflicting information, but our brain is trying to weave those together into a narrative, and sometimes it makes really stupid stories in your dreams. But your brain is actually good at pulling together disparate bits of information and weaving them into a larger scenario. And so that's really what you're looking for, is to take those elements of your conscious thinking, your cognitive thinking, and elements of your unconscious thinking, your heuristic thinking, and to weave a narrative out of those that becomes really the kind of ultimate in a creative solution to a problem. So let me read you one other quotation from Csikszentmihalyi, where it talks about attitudes toward how we're solving those problems. He says, "We approach a problem by assuming there's a best way to solve it, or that there's a way it should be solved by a robot. But the main lesson we can extract from biology is that it's better to cultivate a team of populations that attack the problem in different, overlapping manners. The team of rivals framework suggests that the best approach is to abandon the question, what is the most clever way to solve the problem, in favor of, are there multiple overlapping ways to solve the problem?" So can we weave together all of these things and allow a much richer solution to the problem than would come otherwise. So as we're wrapping up this first half of the class, I want us to think for a minute about how do you train yourself to use your brain in this way that combines the conscious part of the brain and the unconscious part of the brain and makes you really good at creative problem solving. In the second half of the class, we're going to dig much more deeply into the sort of neurological processes that are going on here. But in the first half of the class, the goal is that we kind of understand what this phenomena is about, and then we figure out how do we begin to do things to train ourselves to be better at this. And I think it's analogous to the kind of training you do for sports. I mean, obviously, some of us are better at sports and some of us don't have so much natural ability. It's probably true that some people are better at this kind of brain activity we're talking about, and some people maybe don't have so much natural inclination toward it. That's fine. You know, you play on a football team, some of those people are super gifted, some of those people are just out there having a great time and doing yeoman work and doing a great job of it. So you don't have to have a gift in this regard. And in fact, I would say most people can learn to be fantastic at creative problem solving without any kind of particular gift. Even somebody like Michael Phelps, who, you know, he has a tremendous gift as a swimmer. He's super tall. He's got incredible arm length. He's got hands the size of paddles and feet also that are almost like some sort of webbed animal. I mean, he's got the physiological basis for being a good swimmer. But if he didn't train himself, if he, I don't know, grew up in Arizona and never saw any water, and at age 18 goes to the Olympics and tries to be a great swimmer, I don't care what kind of natural ability he has or what kind of physiological advantage, you know, he's not going to do anything. It's all about the training. And this is a guy who really, really trains. And the way he's been successful as a swimmer is, yeah, he's got some natural ability, but a whole lot of it is just incredibly good training. So how do you train yourself to be good at problem solving? And in a way, again, it's like a sports analogy. If you want to be good at playing football, you have to play football games. You have to be out there and do a scrimmage and, you know, replicate what you're trying to do on the playing field on Friday night. But, you know, there also is another side of training that's not just doing the full-blown thing. So legitimately, you know, if you want to be a good creative problem solver, you need to solve problems. And you need to try to do it in a creative way. And our project this semester is all about simulating that. It's a scrimmage. It's, can we do that exercise in order to learn how to do that better in an application in other parts of our lives or our careers. So that's one useful way to train. But also, if you're a football player, you're not just doing scrimmages all the time. You're doing agility drills, you're working out in the weight room, you're doing all of these more broken down components of training. And I think that's applicable to creative problem solving as well. You need to do things like having an experiential life. You need to do things like that three-step process that Csikszentmihalyi was suggesting of, you know, surprise yourself every day and surprise other people and kind of keep a log of that. This is like agility exercises. This is like weight training to prepare you to be good at creative problem solving. So I'm hoping you guys are embracing this enough that you're beginning to say, how can I train myself to be good at this? How can I do those agility drills and that weightlifting to increase my capacity? And then how can I simulate the actual process and learn to do it better simply by doing it more and being very conscious of how you're doing it. So the goal here is to try to train yourself to be a creative problem solver in every possible way. In those kind of rudimentary drills of components of problem solving, but also to take every opportunity you can to think through, whoa, that's a problem in my life or in my work. I'm going to try to approach that in a little bit more creative way. How could I do that? So good luck on the test coming up. And in the second half of the class, we'll continue on this quest to make all of us a better creative problem solver.